Hello, my name is Betsy Alpert. I'm one of the school counselors at Walton High School, and welcome to the class of 2022 Walton High School College Application Informational Session. This session was presented to all of the senior English classes the second week of school, and this recording is for anybody who missed one of those sessions or anybody who would like to watch it again. So in this recording, we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody knows who their school counselor is. At Walton, we break up the alphabet of the student population and we divide it among all the school counselors. So if your last name is A through CH, you have Mrs. Clary as your counselor. If your last name begins with CI through G, then I am your counselor. Again, I'm Betsy Alpert. If your last name begins with H through K, Mrs. Dunham is your counselor. Last names L through M have Mrs. Watford as their counselors. Last name O through SL, Mrs. Harwood is your counselor. And lastly, if your last name begins with SM through Z, Mrs. Fay is your counselor. Some other important people that work in the counseling office that you all should be aware of is Mrs. Gross, our college advisor. She is the person who you go to for college visits, information about scholarships. You want to make an appointment with her, you can email her, you can see her, email us up. But she is really your college guru. She's more than happy to meet with you and your family and talk and help you guys come up with a good, solid list of colleges. She also does all the volunteer service hours, which we'll get into that more in a few minutes. Mrs. Shrink is our registrar and also our records clerk. She's in the counseling office as well. So any questions about your transcript, ordering your transcript, and any questions at all about any of your records, she is your person to go to. Also, before we get started, we want to make sure that you know that we do have an awesome and fabulous school counseling website, www.waltonhighcounseling.com. It has all types of information for you. At the end of this session, I will show you guys more information and how to navigate the Walton High School Counseling website. You can also go to this from going just straight to the Walton High School website and click on counseling and it will take you there. We encourage everyone to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever your preferred platform is. We push out a lot of information on social media, so you can see our handles down below as well. And lastly, you want to make sure that you guys are all signed up for the PTSA e-blast. That is something that comes out once a week, typically Sunday afternoons or Sunday evenings from the PTSA. And that just is so much information about upcoming events at Walton. It's great and very important to stay in the know. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today? Most of this is going to be about your post-secondary options, what's going to happen after you graduate from high school, helping to build a college list, what things will look like after you leave Walton. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about Naviance as well, what the college application process looks like, scholarships, X2 Law, that is the platform that we use when you keep up to date with your service hours, if you choose to do so. And then lastly, we might have time for a Naviance demonstration at the very end. So let's talk about the whole college admissions process. So this is a question we get all the time in the counseling office. What is it that colleges are looking for during the whole college admissions process? So it's not just one factor. There's several different factors that make up the college admissions decision. First thing is the rigor of your classes. How many honors or AP classes have you taken in high school, or possibly even dual enrollment classes? Are you challenging yourself with these classes? The colleges want to see that you are indeed challenging yourself and that you have tried to put some rigor into your courses while you're at high school. So the more rigor, the stronger of a candidate you may look to the colleges. The next thing that they're going to look at are your grades and your GPA. So how have you done in your classes? What does your GPA look like? You have a weighted and an unweighted GPA, which we'll talk about the difference with that in a few minutes, but how have you done in high school? And maybe you didn't do so great your freshman year because you were 14 years old and you just were still getting used to high school and whatnot. But the last couple of years, junior, even senior year, you finished out really strong. colleges look at that and they take that into consideration. They like to see a growth trend. So just keep that in mind if you're concerned about, oh gosh, maybe I wasn't such a strong student my freshman or sophomore year. Another thing that colleges consider are the test scores. That's the SAT or the ACT. Now, because of COVID, this has changed a little bit. So before COVID, pretty much every university, they did require a valid SAT or ACT score. More and more were becoming test optional, but still almost all the colleges and universities were requiring the SAT and the ACT. And so that would be a big part of that college decision, that admissions decision, was how well you did on the standardized test. Since COVID has hit, last year, pretty much every college became what's called test optional, meaning that if you didn't have a valid SAT or ACT score, or you didn't like or weren't happy with your scores, you didn't have to send those in, and they were not part of the admissions process, not part of that evaluation. Because COVID is still around, that because it's not as intense as it was last year, even though we know with the Delta variant, things are changing every single day, but there are still some colleges that are test optional. And then there are some colleges that are now requiring the SAT and ACT again. With that requirement, unfortunately, the university systems of Georgia are those schools that are requiring an SAT or ACT score. So University Systems of Georgia, that encompasses all the public schools in the state of Georgia. So think like UGA, Georgia Tech, Kennesaw State, Valdosta, Augusta University, all of those schools now are requiring the SAT or ACT again. That's as of August 15th. That might change because things change pretty rapidly due to COVID, but as of August 15th, that is something that you will have to send to any school that you're applying to in the University Systems of Georgia. Other schools, please go on their websites and please check to see what their policy is. So, but you can see, again, going back to what are the factors, rigor of classes, grades in the GPA, and test scores, those tend to be three of the major factors. And then of course they look at plenty of other factors. Colleges do what's called a holistic review, meaning that they don't just look at who you are as a student, they want to look at you as a person as well. So that's when your extracurricular activities, such as volunteer work, or playing a sport, playing an instrument, being involved inside or outside of the school and the community, that plays a huge part of the holistic review. Your essays, your personal statements, that shows colleges who you are. That is your chance to say, hey, I'm not just a name on a transcript. This is who I am as a person. This is what I aspire to study when I'm in your school. This is why I want to go to your school. So really spending some time and attention on your personal essays. That's a great way for the colleges to get to know you as a person and to help with that decision-making process. Letters of recommendation, absolutely. You want to ask teachers or counselors or somebody who knows you really well to write a letter of recommendation for you. Again, it shows the colleges who you are as a person, and those letters of recommendation can attest to your character. Demonstrated interest, again, this has changed a little bit due to COVID. Demonstrated interest is, have you shown the college that you're applying to that you are indeed interested in attending that school? Have you made a college visit to that campus? It could be a virtual visit, it could be in person. I know in person has looked different the last year and a half due to COVID. So that's why there are virtual visits. There's also college visits when the college representatives come to Walton, and you can sign up for those types of visits, meet with that representative, but that shows that you are indeed interested in the school. So again, the big factors, the rigor of classes, grades, GPA, and test scores, if you are going to a non-test optional school, plus the other factors, everything is taken into consideration when it comes to looking at you as a candidate for the school. So moving on, how are you going to build a college list? So like I mentioned before, we are blessed at Walton that we have Mrs. Gross, our college advisor. She is very knowledgeable, and she is more than happy to meet with you and even your parents if need be to help build a college list so that you can find some really great schools that you feel might be a good fit for you. And so when you're building that college list, you can see we tell you, okay, you don't want to just apply to one school. We don't want you to apply to 50 schools either, but about, I would say like 6, 7, 8 schools. That's typically about the average number of schools that students apply to. You want to make sure that you apply to different types of schools. You don't want to just apply to reach schools. That you can see those are where maybe you fall a little bit below what's called the freshman index for a school. And a freshman index is, if you Google freshman index with any college, the freshman index gives you what that mid 50% range of that incoming freshman class has for their GPA, possibly for the number of AP classes that they've taken, possibly for SAT or ACT test scores. Again, that might be a little bit different due to COVID, but it gives you a really good idea about, hey, how do I fall in that freshman index? Do I meet those requirements? Am I on par, on track with what that freshman class looks like? If you are, that means that it's probably going to be your match school for you because you fall within that 50% range. If you don't necessarily meet the same requirements, and maybe not requirements isn't the best word, meet the same admissions numbers as that mid 50% freshmen do, then you might consider that to be a reach school. So with that 50% range, please remember that that means that that's where 50% of their freshmen are sitting. 25% of the freshmen who are currently at the school have a higher GPA, have a higher SAT score, have higher numbers of AP classes, but also 25% have lower than the average of the SAT, of the GPA, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why we encourage you, hey, sure, go ahead, apply to 1 or 2 of those reach schools because you very likely could still get in. We don't want you not to apply to a school just because you feel like, oh man, I needed to, I have a 3.5 GPA, but the mid 50% of the freshmen have a 3.7 GPA. Go ahead and still apply for those reach schools. Make sure that you also apply for those match schools and the likely schools as well, because we want you to have a good, solid college list so that when it comes to May, we're not scrambling around to help you try to find a school that you feel would be a good match for you. And again, Mrs. Gross, she's somebody who can really help you with that college list. So it's important to consider these points when making a college list. You want to check those college admissions requirements, okay? Look at the SAT requirements if they have them. Look at the college deadlines. Look to see if they have specific requirements. It's also important to remember that many colleges, when they are looking at you as a student, they look at your GPA, but in many cases, they also do the GPA themselves. They kind of strip away any honors or AP quality points or dual enrollment quality points that you might have, and colleges can recalculate the GPA in their own manner. In addition, a lot of colleges will only look at your core GPA. That's your English, math, science, social studies, and foreign language. They don't necessarily look at your elective classes. So if you have straight A's in your orchestra class, or you have done all 3 years of the business pathway or something like that, that's wonderful, but some colleges might not consider that when they're evaluating your GPA. We already talked about how students should be strong, like have a good, strong work ethic and show that they do either community service or are involved in their community somehow. You can see with the GPA, going back to that, there will be a weighted and un-GPA listed on your transcripts, which colleges will receive, but in many cases, colleges kind of recalculate their GPA their own way. And one thing that's really important to consider, class rank is not going to be included on your transcript. Cobb County made this decision a few years ago where we no longer rank our students. So when colleges, if that is asked for you in your application, what your class rank is, you can say, we do not rank. Cobb County does not rank. It is not going to affect you in the slightest. It does not hurt you or hinder your chances to get into the school. Please don't ask for counselors either. We don't have that information because Cobb County made that decision. So when you apply to college, you want to make sure that you complete and submit your application by the deadline. I cannot stress that enough. please do not procrastinate. You want to get your application in when the deadline is stated. You don't want to wait until the last minute because, God forbid, what happens if your computer blows up? What happens if there's a big storm and it knocks out all the electricity? Yes, that did happen last year. We can remember when that hurricane came through and it knocked out all the electricity for several people for a couple of days. Don't put yourself in that predicament. Make sure that you do submit your application in ample time in case something happens that would prohibit you from sending in your application by the deadline. Some colleges have several application options. Some will allow you to submit your application through something called Common App. Some will want you to submit it directly to the institution. Colleges, if they give you choices, they don't care which one you do. Whatever you feel is most comfortable with, go ahead and do it that way. Obviously, you want to take your time completing your applications and essays. You want to make sure that you do that because you want to make sure that there's no spelling errors, grammatical errors. You want to really give some good time and thought to this process. And then once you've submitted your application and sent in test scores if needed, letters of recommendation, things like that, make sure that you keep up to date and that you look at that status page. Every college will have their own status page, and it will say, yes, we received your transcript on this date and we received your application on this date. And it's your responsibility to make sure that everything was sent in properly. And if you are missing something, then you can always contact a representative from the Office of Undergraduate Admissions and have a chat with them about what you're missing and what needs to be done to complete your application. All right, so there's several different college application types. Some of them can be a little confusing, so let's go through these. There's something called early decision. Early decision typically is for private schools, and it is a binding decision. That means that you are telling that school, I am so interested in you, I am going to only apply to your school. And if I am accepted, I am making the commitment right now that I will attend your school and I won't attend any other school. So because it's a binding decision, they do require that you sign a statement saying that you understand that it is a binding decision, and your counselor will also have to sign a statement saying that they talked to you about this. Now, the advantage of the early decision is that the applicant pool is much smaller, plus you're really showing demonstrated interest by saying to that college, I like you so much, this is my dream school, this is where I want to go. There's something called early action. That's the next one. And that is not a binding decision, but early action is when there's a deadline that is before the regular decision deadline. UGA, Georgia Tech, Georgia State, they all have early action deadlines, which are a couple months before the regular decision deadline. And that you're showing, again, the school, hey, I really like you, I'm a really strong candidate for your school, but you do not have to make the commitment to go to the school if you are accepted for early action. Then you can apply to several schools early action, unlike early decision, where you can only apply to one school for early decision. So there is something else called single choice restricted early action. That is also a non-binding. And so that's not overly common. It's not overly common. The big thing to remember is that it's non-binding, unlike the early decision. If you have questions about that, go see your counselor or ask Mrs. Gross. Something called rolling admissions. Some schools do that when you apply and you meet their minimum requirements, then pretty much a couple weeks later, you're going to hear back from that college and let you know, they'll let you know, like, yes, you've been accepted. And I mean, there are some schools like the University of Alabama where students hear back by early September because they're on that rolling admissions. Then there's something called regular decision. And that is when, boom, this is the absolute deadline for you to get all of your stuff in. After this deadline, sorry, we are not going to be accepting any more applications. Lastly, there's something called priority deadline. That is going to be used in many cases for scholarships. So an example could be University of Kentucky. Their regular decision might be in February, but they can say, hey, if you're interested in being considered for scholarships, even though our regular decision is not until February, you need to get in all of your stuff by a certain date in December. And I'm just throwing that out there. But you have to get your stuff in by December, whatever the date might be, in order for you to be considered for certain scholarships. So priority deadlines, you don't have to meet that, but there definitely are advantages to the priority deadlines. All right, so how has COVID-19 impacted the college admissions? So we already talked about standardized testing and how many schools have become test optional, and they were last year, and a lot have remained test optional for this year, while several have not remained optional for this year. Again, all the schools in the state of Georgia that are public schools, they unfortunately are no longer test optional schools. So if your school is test optional, you do have the choice to send in an SAT or an ACT score if you want to. If you choose to, great, go ahead and send this in. We tell you, if you do that, that we want your SAT or ACT score to be at least at that mid 50%, if not higher than what the 50% range looks like, because that will give you an advantage during the admissions process. But let's say that you take the SAT and your score isn't at that 50% mid-range. So then we say, okay, maybe don't send it in. And the colleges then, it's not going to hurt you. And every college rep has said it is not going to hurt you. However, it just means that colleges are going to put more emphasis on your GPA, on your rigor of courses, on those extracurricular activities, on your letters of recommendation, et cetera, et cetera. So if you have questions about should I or shouldn't I send in my SAT scores or my ACT scores, please see your counselor or please make an appointment with Mrs. Gross and we can help you come up with a good, strong, educated decision. College visits, again, we talked about demonstrated interest before. And so colleges know that, it's been very hard for you to actually physically come to the campus for a college visit. So that's why there's virtual visits. And that's why also we host over 100 and something schools every year that come to Walton to talk about what their school is like, what the admissions requirements are like, answer questions and whatnot. So that was going to be a great way for you, again, to really show some interest into that school. And so there's also going to be a COVID-19 essay question that is part of the Common App essay questions. So if you've already started a Common App application, you should know there's I think like 7 different essay questions that you can answer. One of them is about COVID. If COVID has impacted you, maybe last year your grades were just terrible because virtual learning is just not your strong suit. Maybe you got sick. Maybe a family member or a close friend of the family got sick, something like that. If and how COVID affected you, if you choose to, you can write an essay about that, and that will show the colleges how the last year and a half have affected you. Okay, this is important information. When you are doing your college applications, they are going to ask how many students are in the class of 2022. So as of a few days ago, that number is 672 students. The number changes a little bit due to students moving into Walton, students withdrawing from Walton. But for the time being, put down that there's 672 students in your class. Remember, we do not report class rank. Our grading scale is a 4.0 grading scale. And coming up, we're going to talk a little bit more about FERPA, but we do want you to waive your FERPA rights when it's asked, and we will tell you why in a few minutes about that. All right, so lots of people don't necessarily consider two-year schools or vocational schools during this whole college process, but two-year schools are awesome. They are ridiculously less expensive than a four-year school. Many cases, they don't have the same prerequisites in order to get into the two-year schools. There might not be a GPA requirement. There might not be an SAT or ACT requirement. And a lot of students go to a two-year school if maybe their GPA wasn't super stellar, maybe they didn't do 2 years of the same foreign language in high school, and they go to a two-year school, work on their GPA, and then they transfer to a four-year school and graduate with a bachelor's degree from a four-year school. So schools like Georgia Highlands, Georgia Perimeter, those are examples of two-year colleges, and they're wonderful and fabulous and still give you plenty of opportunities to go to a four-year school if you choose to. There's also the technical college system of Georgia, and that think like Chattahoochee Tech or Gwinnett Tech, Athens Tech. And so those schools, not only do they have a program called a technical specialist degree, where you can go and take your core classes, your English, math, science, social studies, and foreign language, and then transfer to a school that is a four-year school. But they also have great programs, very high in demand programs as well for high demand careers that you can go to, and you could potentially graduate in 12 months and 18 months, possibly 2 years. And you can see there's a whole list of programs that technical schools have. Sometimes technical schools and two-year colleges don't require the SAT or ACT. They might have you take what's called the AccuPlacer exam instead. Again, but due to COVID, that's going to be, you need to ask every school what their policy is. Just keep in mind also that some two-year schools, they might have a certain GPA, or they might have a world language requirement, but please check with the two-year school, go on the website and talk to somebody from their admissions office if you have specific questions. We do have students every year who do decide to go into the military, which is awesome. So one thing to remember, actually a couple things to remember with the military, you do need to have a high school diploma. You cannot have a GPA and go into the military. You must have a diploma. You need to take a test called the ASVAB. We do give it at Walton typically 2 times a year in the fall and the spring. And it's an aptitude test that helps place you in the, like what job you would be well suited for in the military based on the test results. You want to make sure that you are in contact with the recruiter. So there are recruiters for all of the branches of the military. And if you don't know who that recruiter is, please come ask your counselor, or you can make an appointment with Mrs. Gross. And then you will need to request your transcript in May, your final transcript after you graduate, because like we said, the military does require that you do have a high school transcript, a final transcript, because you've graduated. There are service academies. So think like West Point, that's an example of a service academy. They are highly selective, very challenging to get into. It does require an endorsement by Congress or Senate, by a congressman or a senator. And that process really is a long drawn out process. If you do have a question, please go ask your counselor. We do have, or there are ROTC scholarship programs as well. Some of you might belong to the ROTC. I know it's not housed at Walton, I know it's at Wheeler, but even if you don't, you can still potentially get an ROTC scholarship as well. And then there is a requirement in many cases after you graduate from college to serve in one of the branches of the military. All right, so I'm going to stop here for now. I'm going to make another recording of the Naviance, but thank you all so much for listening to this. And again, the second recording is going to be all about Naviance from this point on.